Although I forgot to write it down, I believe that I'm beginning with a reading from the Gospel of Luke. John's disciples, John the Baptist's disciples, told him about all these things. Calling two of them, he sent them to the Lord to ask, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?" When the men came to Jesus, they said, "John the Baptist sent us to you to ask, are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?" At that very time, Jesus cured many who had diseases, sicknesses, and evil spirits, and gave sight to many who were blind. So he replied to the messengers, "Go back and report to John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor." For a good part of the past 2 weeks, I have been in Iowa, helping my sister sort and redistribute and throw away, etc., the contents of our mother's house. It's been a little over a year since she died, and we spent most of this past year's energy on her house in Michigan. So this period that I just spent was not a time of intense grief, although of course there was sadness and there were memories. There was also wonderment and humor. For instance, when you do this kind of clearing work, you can't help but be on the lookout for odd secrets or hidden treasures. I've heard stories of people finding hundreds of dollars packed in coins in old coffee cans, or finding dollar bills interleaved between blocks of quilting fabric. You just never know what your forebears may have hidden away in some unexpected place. My family being what it is, however, of course, the unexpected treasure that we found was this, the Arm & Hammer Guide to Baking Soda. A book that Suzanne decided to keep and we brought home, and it so fascinated Helen that she spent a good part of yesterday reading it to us word by word. Apparently it was created sometime in the 1970s. Neither my sister nor I remembers it. We have no idea where it came from, but whenever it was created, postage was still 13 cents. So that kind of narrows it down. And it's full of handouts from a public relations office that tell you everything you might ever have wanted to know about baking soda, where it comes from and how it's made, recipes for using it with your laundry, in your cooking, for your pool, for hygiene, including bathing in it, for using it on your pets, for using it to make Play-Doh, to make ornaments and decorations, for using it to clean batteries. I want to read you a little bit from this gem, A Day in the Life of the Trona Family, How They Interact with Baking Soda. And I apologize, although I believe this was written in the 1970s, the family relationships it depicts are really from the 1950s. And if you grew up with Dick and Jane, this will be very familiar to you. But if not, my apologies. So at 7 a.m. on Monday, the family wakes up, and as usual, it's a mad dash to the bathroom. And also as usual, Susie and Billy get there first. While Susie brushes all except her missing 2 front teeth with Arm & Hammer baking soda, Billy vigorously scrubs the baking soda paste into his oiled hands and nails to remove the last traces of yesterday's bicycle grease. Before they race out, both use a quick gargle of 1 teaspoon baking soda and a half glass of warm water so their mouths are fresh and sweet enough to greet good morning to teachers and friends. At 7:30 a.m., everyone is drawn to the kitchen where Mom is flipping homemade griddle cakes leavened, of course, with Arm & Hammer baking soda. There's no trouble getting everyone to eat breakfast this morning. At 8, requests are still coming in for just 1 more pancake, please. At 8:30, Susie and Billy run to meet the school bus. Dad drives off to start a busy day, and Mom has errands to do later, but first she's going to take care of a few chores. She empties the baking soda in the refrigerator, adds a new box, notices that the dog's white coat is beginning to look a little dingy. There's no time to mess with a tub bath. Instead, she rubs Arm & Hammer baking soda dry into his fur and briskly brushes it through and out. Doggy smell also disappears. Sam is happy. Mom is happy too. Before putting away the Arm & Hammer, she soaks his feeding dishes, toys, and dog brush in a solution of baking soda and water. At 10 a.m., it's begun to rain. She realizes that Billy and Susie are going to have to play indoors when they come home, so she quickly prepares the recipe for play clay, which I think is like Play-Doh, and she tells us how to make it. She wraps it, she puts it in the refrigerator, she leaves them a note. At 2:30, they come home, they start to play with the play clay. At 3 o'clock, Dad has finished lunch and is just about on schedule for his next meeting. Those of us who ever had to mess around with distributor caps will appreciate this portion. With the turn of the car key, the motor is humming even in this wet weather, for Dad prides himself on maintaining a trouble-free car. Regular maintenance includes periodic attention to the battery. Just the other day, he noticed a buildup of green dust on the battery, so he slowly poured a solution of 1/2 cup baking soda and warm water over the battery's terminal posts and rubbed away the loosened deposits with sandpaper. A final rinse with clear water, and the motor was again running smoothly. Dad knows that cleaning corrosion dust from batteries helps prevent bad connections and startups. At 4 o'clock, Mom starts preparing the spaghetti. She still has time to take a bath at 5 o'clock, where she adds a cupful of baking soda to the bath water. At 6:30, they clean up with baking soda. Dad cleans the coffee pot with baking soda. At 7:30, they go to the family room to discuss their dream of their own backyard swimming pool, which, although they do not know it, they will use baking soda to clean. And at 10 p.m., Dad finds that the spaghetti has left him with a little indigestion. He uses a tonic of baking soda to make himself feel better. 11 p.m., say goodnight to the Tronas. Tomorrow is another baking soda day. So, saying goodnight to the Tronas, we get back to the Gospels, which is the reason we are here. One of the really frustrating things in the Gospels and in the epistles is that they set a goal for us that they don't tell us how to achieve. Jesus says, if you want to be close to God, follow me. And he shows us through his life, through the lives of the apostles and the community around him, what it means to follow him, to live fully in love and engaged with the world, healing the sick, feeding the hungry, liberating the prisoner, befriending the lonely, giving drink to the thirsty, sight to the unseeing, hearing to the deaf. But once the physical presence of Jesus is gone, it is not so clear how to find the source of the love that will enable us as Jesus followers to do those things. The Old Testament is full of instructions, somewhere around 620 of them, about things to do and things not to do that will lead us nearer to God and to holiness. But the Gospels and the epistles are short on instructions. They're long on stories about what it looks like to follow Jesus, but almost mute on the subject of how to follow Jesus when Jesus isn't standing right in the room with us. For that reason, a large part of the work of the church for 2,000 years has been something called spiritual formation, which is a shorthand way of talking about how to form and shape people's hearts so that they are able to love as God loves. Over 2,000 years, the means identified for spiritual formation have been varied and erratic, ranging from fasting and unceasing prayer to meditating through icons. Some of these means have been aimed more at self-purification and self-punishment than at becoming more loving. From our Quaker heritage, we simply assume that the goal of spiritual formation is to develop a more loving heart. The monastic movement, starting with the hermits in the colonies of the desert in the 4th century after Christ, and continuing through the great and small monasteries of medieval and modern Europe, was one attempt to develop a way of living that would allow the monks and the nuns to more closely imitate the way of Jesus. And the rhythm of the monastic life included silence, prayer, service to the community, Bible reading, self-examination, spiritual direction, confession and repentance, and then more prayer. Each order of monastics emphasized or discovered their particular focus for moving the heart toward love. By the 17th century, the time of George Fox, one of the well-established means of persuading yourself of the magnitude of God's love was to examine your own life for every sin, to detail to yourself all the ways in which you fell short of God's standards, to catalog every way in which you depended on the mercies of the King of creation, and therefore to be persuaded of God's love and grace, since Jesus' death on the cross had assured you that God was capable of loving magnanimously and generously, even a worm such as yourself. And although I have certainly spent my fair share of time groveling around amid feelings of unworthiness and shame, I have not found that a particularly effective way of being persuaded of God's love for all creation, or an effective way, especially, of increasing my love for that of God and all of the creation around me. In fact, bathing in feelings of my shamefulness tends to decrease my love for all of the creation around me. I have that in common with the French monk we know as Brother Lawrence. As a lay brother of a Carmelite monastery in Paris, Brother Lawrence came to be known for his sweet and generous and loving spirit. He was never a teacher or a leader. He worked for many years in the kitchen, and after that, because he was no longer physically able to undertake the kitchen work, he worked repairing the monks' sandals. But his loving spirit stood out. And at some point, the abbot of his monastery asked him how he had come to achieve this sweetness of spirit. And his answers were that, even though he knew that he was supposed to practice self-mortification and meditative devotion and set prayer, that none of those means had brought him closer to God. Instead, he said that he had realized that all of those practices were meant as the means to attain a sense of God's love and to become loving. And so he simply set his mind on God's love and God's magnitude as often as he possibly could. He did everything for God and with God, and he conversed with God about the common things in his life as often as he could remember to do so. He said that God was his friend, and you would not leave your friend alone if a friend came to visit you. So he was in constant conversation with his friend who had come to visit. And the more often he conversed with him, the more often he reminded himself to be in conversation with God, the easier it became to be in that constant conversation, to be constantly aware of God's loving presence with him, of God's love for him, and of God's love for the world around him. Next week, I will bring to share some of the particular things that Brother Lawrence said about his spiritual life that have struck me. But this week, coming home from Iowa and hearing all about the Trona family, I have to say that it occurred to me that if we could treat God in the way the Trona family treats baking soda, we might well be on our way to discovering the sweet and untroubled spirit of Brother Lawrence. For the Trona family, baking soda is something that is always at hand, a box that you can reach for as a staple in an emergency if the stove should catch fire, for cleansing and purification, for creativity and art. It is something that is always present, often forgotten, and yet ever at hand. God could be the same thing to us. If we determined that our conversation with God was our best tool, was our medicine, was our joy, that God was always at hand and always within reach, God could be sprinkled throughout our daily lives in the same way that baking soda is sprinkled throughout the Turner family's life from morning till night. And I think the reason this captures my imagination is because it is something that could work for me. I know about myself that I am not great at setting aside time for prayer and devotion, for spiritual reading, for meditation, or even for volunteer service. What I am able to do is find moments to hold conversation. A sentence here, a couple of paragraphs there. This is a spiritual discipline that it falls within my capacity to undertake. You could call this, and I probably will, the lazy man's way to God, or you could call it the distracted and overworked individual's way to God. But I just think that if this one 1970s family can find so many spaces in their lives for baking soda, even an individual as distracted and harassed with as many responsibilities as I have, which I think are no greater than any of yours, even that person, even myself, ought to be able to find at least as many spaces for God as there are spaces for baking soda in the day.